The world's on fire. Our river's gone dry. The rich are getting richer. They've left us out here to die. Mass migration. We got no place to hide. Who's against us? Who's on our side? Are they too dumb, or are they just in on it? Liars and cheaters, a red-hot grip. Ditch the gaslighting gas bag that speaks in code. He's a faker, a shaker, a pontificating pantload. In this house of mirrors, we've hit the wall before it's too late. Let's go. Come on, y'all. It's border to border and coast to coast. It's real, it's facts, and it ain't no hoax. It's Podcast by George, and it's showtime, folks. Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. God, I love these podcasts. People say, you still doing the podcast? Hell yeah, why wouldn't I? I mean, I get to talk to folks like our guest today. And folks, it is the doc. The doctor is back in the house, Dr. Steffen W. Schmidt. And by way of introduction, here's his bio that I've got, and I love reading this too. He earned a PhD in public law and government from Columbia University, New York. He's a founding and sustaining member of LULAC Council 307 in Iowa, one of the oldest Hispanic community and leadership organizations. He also served as the chair of the Iowa Governor's Spanish-Speaking Commission, later renamed the Department of Latino Affairs. He was born and grew up in Columbia. He's the author of 10 books, including this one off on my left side that I always have this thing. Let me show it to you here. There it is. See it off my left side? That's the textbook that he wrote that's in more college classrooms on American government than any other book I think ever written. But he's written 10 of them at least. And that book, by the way, is in its 19th edition. He's the author of many articles and columns on Latin America, U.S. issues, cyber threats, the politics of disruption, and women in politics. And of course, he has written extensively on climate. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. He's a frequent political commentator of American and international media. He's got that nom de plume, as they say, as Dr. Politics. He's the recipient of the Iowa Governor's Volunteer Award for work with the Latino community and former chair of the Iowa Governor's Spanish-Speaking Commission, the Department of Latinos Affairs. And of course, he's mostly known as the Lucan Endowed Professor Emeritus now of Political Science from Iowa State University. So let's take that graphic down. Let's take that off the screen. Let's click a button here and let's move this over here and bring him in and say good morning. Hello, hi, how are you? To Dr. Politics. How you doing, Doc?
Good morning from New Hampshire.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that specifically. There's some news that I wanted to get to right off of the hop to talk about New Hampshire. We're going to have a little fun here to begin with. Because we need it, because we're going to be talking about climate, and the climate news is all bad. My God, it is depressing, folks. I'm going to bring this up on screen because this is somebody that I remember all too well, and I think probably the doc does too. Doc, you know who that is?
Yep, Harry Truman.
Yeah, Harry R. Truman. There he is on his front porch with his bourbon and Coke, which you like to drink all day long and entertain the media with. This was back in 1980, folks. Mount St. Helens. I was in the newsroom, and I got to tell you, this is really, it's kind of silly, but it kind of formulates my thinking on climate and listening to scientists and geologists and stuff. I always flash back, and I always think of Harry R. Truman. So let's bring this video clip in. Now, this is from the U.S. Forestry Service, and this will give us a little background here, and then we'll come back, read a little bit, and then get going with the doc.
Those having homes, lodges, or camps in the area were urged to leave. Using a donated helicopter and a large drop box, the operators of the Spirit Lake Youth Camp began hauling out. Most were taking the warnings seriously. Still others were not impressed with the warnings.
You don't mind working in the shadow of the mountain, then?
No, not at all. There's nothing to be scared of. More danger from one of them trees falling on the backside than there is a mountain of exploding.
For 83-year-old Harry Truman, operator of St. Helens Lodge on Spirit Lake, the warnings fell on deaf ears. He wasn't moving anywhere.
That's my life. Spirit Lake and Mount St. Helens is my life, folks. I've lived there 50 years. It's a part of me. That mountain and that lake is a part of Truman, and I'm a part of it.
So to me, that's prophetic, and it reminds me so much of the current climate debate because there are still deniers out there. And Doc, I got to tell you, at the time when I was in the newsroom, I may even have interviewed this guy. I can't remember. Everybody was calling him up and talking to him. I mean, he talked to anybody, especially when he had a few of those bourbon and cokes in him. But late in
Yeah.
the afternoon, he was very articulate. But there were people that thought even back then, well, maybe Harry's right. You know, maybe maybe Mount St. Helens isn't going to blow, but all the scientists were saying, no, it's going to happen. It is happening. The earth is shaking. It's going to open up and bury everything in sight. And of course, Harry right now is under 50 yards. Count them, 50 yards of molten slag. That thing blew up. Harry was completely wrong. That's the way that I feel about these people that are, number one, denying the climate catastrophe. And then number two, are unwilling to do anything about it, Doc.
Yep. No, and the little connection to me is that we went out there to pick up a horse for our horse farm just when the volcano blew up.
Wow.
We went out to the pasture and the horse was completely covered in ash. We loaded it up into the trailer and got out of Dodge, came back to Iowa. We were lucky we were not on the side where it blew. We were on the other side, but it was an ominous and to be respected because everything was covered with ash. And of course, the world is slowly being covered with ash as forest fires erupt everywhere. That was my little connection. I never met Harry Truman, but I met the other Truman somewhere on TV, I think. But you're right that, we look out there and in some places it's pretty clear that things have gotten out of control. Sea levels are rising, forest fires are raging, drought in other places, massive flooding in some. And the problem, we've talked about this, George, is it's just hard to get people to give up their car, to give up their air conditioner, to give up, all the things that are high intensity energy using and contributing to global warming. It's hard for people to give them up unless there are fantastic alternatives. And we're just trying slowly to get, renewable energy and things like that. But some renewable energy, like ethanol, is very controversial. So some of them are even wind generated energy, which you'd think, well, we're getting it for free. But, in a lot of places, people don't want those big windmills sitting out there off the coast of New England. They've had a huge fight over that. They're trying to put in massive solar panel fields that will generate electricity that way. And local communities go nuts. They don't want, not in my backyard, NIMBY on solar panels. In Key West, where I have spent some time, they don't allow you to put solar panels on the roofs of your house because it's a historic town and the solar panels look horrible. And then there's the new thing, which is that insurance companies have said, if you have solar panels on your roof and there's a big storm, we're not going to pay for the damages done to your roof. So everything is sort of not geared to make us be able to move in the direction of sustainable and cleaner energy.
Well, my advice to all the viewers and listeners of Podcast by George, anytime the next kook comes up to you and says, I don't know if climate change is real, ask them if they remember Harry R. Truman, not Harry S. Truman, the 33rd president of the United States, but Harry R. Truman up there in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. And a couple of things about Harry that I want to underscore here. He was very absolute and very sure of his quote unquote science. He could stand right there and tell you why, if the mountain were to blow, it would affect the other side of the mountain, not the area where he was out. He would be fine. He would escape unscathed, but he could tell you exactly why that was. Like I said, he's under 50 foot of molten cold lava, right? There's this picture again. The other thing I want to bring up, and the picture is a good underscore for this particular point. Harry was he would have been like a baby boomer, an older baby boomer generation person is today. The doc said people don't want to give things up. Well, Harry didn't want to give up his mountain home. He didn't want to change. He was 82 years old when this photo was taken, folks. He didn't have anywhere to go. He didn't know anything else. He was having a good time being interviewed out there. The beautiful television photojournalists were coming out there to interview him and stuff like that. He was holding court with his bourbon and cook. He was having probably the time of his life, but it all ended when Mount St. Helens blew and his science was completely wrong. And again, we're not talking about climate. He was kind of a geology denier, Doc, maybe not a climate denier.
Yeah. He was a science denier because the scientists kept saying, the weakness is over here. And
right. Poor Harry, rest in peace. But there's a lesson to be learned there, and that's the reason that I wanted to bring that up and start off with that clip. Also in that video, the guy with the dill pickle, he cracks me up. He's just a forestry worker there. Hey, folks, you don't want to get your COVID information from a podcaster like me. You don't want to get your geological information from a guy eating a dill pickle for lunch. I mean, that's another good lesson to be learned when you look at that. I hope he wasn't there that day because my God, I mean, it blew and it was game over. Okay, so let me bring this into view now to read through this a little bit and get the doc's perspective on this, because really this was the genesis more than anything to bring him on at this time. We swapped some emails, and Doc was talking about these tipping points, and he said, George, this is worse than a lot of people may realize. A new UN report shows fossil fuel addiction is a recipe for permanent climate chaos. That's what he was just talking about, fossil fuel addiction. This year's United in Science report shows climate impacts heading into uncharted territories of destruction. Not just uncharted territories. Every word means something, folks. Uncharted territories of destruction, said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. A multi-agency report coordinated by the World Meteorological Organization, the same kind of scientists and folks that were telling us about Mount St. Helens, released on Tuesday, says current global climate mitigation efforts are woefully inadequate and warns without more urgent action, the physical and socioeconomic impacts will be increasingly devastating. And I would say so much so that it's just kind of hard to imagine. The report, United in Science 2022, this just came out, folks, found that greenhouse gas concentrations continue to rise to record record highs, and the global emission reduction pledges for 2030 need to be, okay, Doc, jump in here, because save me. I'm on the Windows edge. I'm on the ledge here. They need to be 7 times higher than our pledge for 2030 to be in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement. I look at that, Doc, and I say, or I think to myself, and based on what you said earlier, if we've got to be 7 times higher to be in line to reach that 1.5 degrees Celsius, we've got to hope that the scientists are wrong. Remember, that's what Harry was hoping for, or just get ready for the inevitable. This is really shocking and depressing.
Well, it is, and I guess maybe this solution is, higher quality bourbon and Coca-Cola. That probably helped Harry get over the volcanic explosion. I don't think we can reach those goals. I see places that are beautiful forests. They're cutting them down and building houses and then putting in lawns and then buying huge lawnmowers that race back and forth at least once a week. Leaf blowers blowing the leaves. People just love that stuff. And it's in the culture. It's kind of baked into our society. There was a guy in Ames, I remember, up there near Emma McCarthy Lee Park, who tried to leave his yard and the grass in front of his house by the sidewalk natural. So it was huge weeds and all kinds of, Canadian thistles and stuff. Man, the neighbors went bananas. And I think he finally had to mow everything down and, get it back to a suburban quality home. I hope he's watching this, because it was just, you drive by and it was like, whoa, there's a jungle. And then there would be mowed lawns. Our whole way of thinking about what is great and wonderful is, is very energy intensive, very energy intensive.
The butterflies and bees were loving that guy's front yard.
Yeah,
Probably more people ought to do that. Grass is horrible as any type of environmental crop, so to speak. I mean, mowed grass. And here's the thing: I've actually had a podcast. I devoted part of it to mowing. Doc, it was several
yeah.
years ago. But what I told people was, my God, not millions, but the billions of dollars I think that we've spent in this country on yard mowing is beyond belief. And the part that cracks me up is the suburbanites that you're talking about. They'll whiz around on these zero radius riding lawnmowers and at the same time then go to the gym to walk or run. It's like, what the hell? Why don't you push a mower around in your yard and kill two birds with one stone if you're so disposed? Well, let me bring this up because I digress. Yeah.
Can I confess? Can I confess? On my
Yeah.
acreage in Nevada, Iowa, we mowed.
Yeah. Well, I
We
mow
had
too.
horses. The horses ate a lot of the grass in the
Yeah.
pasture, so we just mowed, Canadian thistles and other things. But we mowed around the farmhouse. We mowed around the farmyard. We mowed around the barns, because that's what you did. That's what that's just the way you do things.
Who was that president right after the turn of the century? I'm not going to be able to remember. I don't know if you can or not, to turn the sheep loose on the White House lawn. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's still thought of as his legacy. I can't remember which president that was, but
I
yeah.
don't remember either, but
Yeah.
they do use goats in some
Yeah.
places
Oh,
and
goats
turn
are-
them loose around
are great,
highways and stuff. They put up an electric fence and let them do the mowing, But then they poop, and then that creates greenhouse,
But also it creates natural fertilizer. Let me bring this. Let me bring this back up here because our time is always limited with the doc, and I know we're going to run out. I got a ton of stuff to get to. This is from Common Dreams now, talking about that United in Science report that we started here with. It shows climate impacts heading into uncharted territories of destruction. Now, that's the wording that I emphasized earlier. Yet each year we double down on this fossil fuel addiction. Okay, so I mentioned that. Now, floods, droughts, heat waves, extreme storms, and wildfires sound like the world today, folks. Yeah, turn on the evening news tonight. Check out about the first 10 minutes. It's going to be all about floods, droughts, heat waves, extreme storms, and wildfires. They're going from bad to worse, breaking records with alarming frequency, said Guterres. Heat waves in Europe, colossal floods in Pakistan, prolonged and severe droughts in China, the Horn of Africa, and the United States. There is nothing natural about the new scale of these disasters. They are the price of humanity's fossil fuel addiction. Now, in addition to monitoring extreme weather incidents, the report addresses the need for further research on global tipping points. Now, this is where we started. This is what the doc pointed out to me in that email. He said it includes the melting of the polar ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica, which would have global consequences due to substantial additional sea level rise for hundreds to thousands of years. Okay, I highlighted that because I wanted you to talk about that, Doc. You and I both, at this point, we've got more, as they say, in the cart than we do out in front of the horse. This part always troubles me, the fact that we are forever changing things, and that report underscores it, for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, by what we're doing, by messing up our own sandbox. I don't think that gets emphasized enough. People like Harry Truman, he didn't give a damn. He was 82 years old. He was going to stay there till the very end. But what about everybody that comes after us, Doc? This is a shame.
Well, it really is. And, I was watching a little news the other night, and it was the horrible floods in Pakistan.
Yes.
Entire areas the size of some of the biggest states you can imagine, underwater, literally underwater, people having to kind of walk along on boards and stuff. I can imagine their water supply is contaminated. I can imagine if they are sick and need medication, there's no way they're going to get anything. There's a fund drive at Iowa State University, the Pakistani Student Association, to send help, to send supplies and food supplies and stuff to their country. And those things are not going to change much. It's just going to get worse. A lot of the world is not up in the mountains where the water can run off, which can also be a problem. It's right down by the coast, by the ocean. Bangladesh and India, Pakistan has that problem. And so it's real. It's biblical in some sense, really. If you believe in biblical stuff, man, it's happening out there. We know that this is a huge problem.
Let me finish this article here, just one more paragraph. Other global tipping points mentioned in the report include the drying of the Amazon rainforest, which will cause cascading global and local impacts, as well as sustained regional droughts throughout the world, which will impact the global carbon cycle and disrupt major weather systems such as monsoon. And that's not something they're speculating may happen. Those are things that are currently happening. And as the doc underscores, Pakistan, my God, I don't know if anybody on planet Earth has ever seen anything like that before. And, Doc, I've mentioned here on the show earlier, and here's my, big three that you've seen me put up a lot of times: climate, war, and healthcare. I'm thinking about future podcasts focusing only on those, or maybe because of what's going on, focusing solely on climate, because everything else just, in my mind, kind of pales in comparison, except for an accidental nuclear strike that could end the planet or something like that. But this is going to get us all, and a lot of these other things that I used to think I should be talking about, and now maybe even I could be talking about, I'm thinking, maybe they're not so important. What about you? Now, have you written a book on climate, or I know you've written papers and stuff like that. Do you think you should be focusing more on climate as opposed to just like rank and file politics?
You mean who won the New Hampshire primary?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
You got it. Oh,
that kind of stuff is sort of flash news that we get all excited about.
Yes.
The news about Trump associates being now subpoenaed or
yes.
Those are the things that seem to pop to the top of the news. And yes, I should be doing more on climate. And when I get interviewed by the news media, it's almost never about climate.
I know it.
It's almost always about these, important but more short-term interests that we have. And when you look at polls, George, this, the environment and climate change is not very high in the polls on how people vote. People vote on inflation, on the price of gas. They vote on stuff like that, which affects their lives immediately. And the people who are being affected by climate change immediately don't seem to be politically engaged enough, and maybe there aren't enough of them, because you'd think that their number one priority, once their hollow floods out and their house is underwater and their car is floating down the creek, you'd think that they would really want their politicians to address the climate issue, but they don't seem to do that. So I don't know I think what we have to do is offer people very accessible and affordable solutions to a lot of the things that we're talking about. We need to work much harder on that. I mean, energy is number one,
And it doesn't rate. People don't seem to want to care. I can't hardly get anybody to even watch my podcast to talk about it. They want to, cover their eyes, stick their fingers in their ears. And I tend to think that a lot of people are Harry R. Truman about this thing. But I'm going to bring this up on screen because it's exactly what you were talking about. Now, folks that follow my podcast know that Doc Politics is a big thing in Iowa. He's heard around the world. He's on a lot of these media outlets in some countries that I can't even pronounce. But he's also big news up in New Hampshire. And there's some news here coming out of New Hampshire that I wanted to get at and have you comment on, Doc. This is out of the Associated Press. And this is just, I think, today. The Republican contest for Senate in New Hampshire, this is what we were talking about, remained a tight race early this morning between conservative Donald Bolduc. Is this guy's name Bolduc, Doc? Is that how you pronounce it?
Bolduc, yeah.
Bolduc. Okay, Bolduc. And the more moderate Chuck Morse, as the final primary night of the midterm season again tested the far right's influence over the GOP. Okay, so they're looking at this as a bellwether as to whether or not the Trumpies and the right wing are going to swarm back into power. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell acknowledged that the challenge last month, saying his party may be more likely to end Democrats' narrow control of the House than the Senate. He bemoaned candidate quality as a factor that could sway some outcomes in his chamber. Now, bear in mind, the tuttlehead, Mitch McConnell, he hates Trump. Some Democratic groups, meanwhile, sponsored primary ads promoting Baldock, predicting he'd make an easier November opponent for Hassan. That's consistent with Democratic-aligned organizations backing pro-Trump candidates in key races around the country. A strategy some have criticized, arguing that it could backfire if those candidates go on to win their general elections. And there's a huge precedent for this. It's 2016. It's the rise of Donald Trump. I'm going to get to that in just a little bit. But this is what's called a PIPER strategy. I didn't know that they were still doing this. They're not only still doing it in New Hampshire, according to the AP doc, this is taking place all around the country. The DNC, the Democrats, are supporting people like Baldock. I mean, what could go wrong, right?
You know, you are absolutely right, because the conventional wisdom is that he is a former military, high-level military officer, retired. He says the U.S. Should basically ally itself with the Taliban in Afghanistan. He says that the current governor and next governor, again, of New Hampshire, because he's so popular, Governor Sununu, who is a moderate Republican conservative, but moderate, is a communist and has taken money from, drug dealers from China. So Baldock is a very hard-edged guy. But, I've talked to a couple of people here in the last few days, and they had on Baldock caps and stuff. And I don't challenge them. I just ask them. And they tell me he's a wonderful guy. He's such a nice person. He has, he was a young police officer. Then he joined the military. And we need people who are not corrupt politicians who are lining their pockets. So when we paint people like him, as some sort of extreme monster, to the people who voted for him, he probably came across as, just a new, fresh face. Remember, Donald Trump was a new, fresh face. Everybody said, well, it's going to be easy to beat him with the most qualified person to ever run for president, Hillary Clinton. And we were wrong on that. There's a young woman who just won the Republican primary in New Hampshire for governor, and she is also very conservative. And Donald Trump hasn't endorsed them specifically, but they clearly fall into that category. And we'll have to see. Right? November will tell us if those were poor choices by voters in the different parts of the country where, very conservative, Trump-leaning candidates are winning, or whether, voters will go for them. I mean, I honestly can't predict it. Nobody thought Donald Trump could get nominated by the Republicans when he ran in Iowa in the caucuses. And then nobody thought he could win when he got the nomination of the Republican Party.
Yeah, everybody forgets. I mean, if you go back in time, everybody kind of thought that he was a goofus with a lot of money, a game show host, which he was. People thought Jeb Bush was probably going to get the nomination, but this goes exactly to what the doc is talking about. And the Democrats, believe it or not, bear some of this responsibility. Let me bring this article up to talk about this Pied Piper strategy just briefly. This is out of Salon, written by the great Ben Norton, how the Hillary Clinton campaign deliberately elevated Donald Trump with its Pied Piper strategy. Now, a lot of people are unaware of this, and people need to realize this because it's still going on. As I mentioned, as we started here, they're doing it in New Hampshire. What they're doing is people are donating to the DNC. The DNC, the Democrats, are giving the money. They're giving their support to these Republican conservative candidates, thinking it'll be easier for their nominee, for their Democrat to defeat in primaries and elections. For God's sake, like I said, what could go wrong with this? Well, 2016 went wrong. You turn on television tonight, everybody's talking about Donald Trump. Everybody's lost their mind over Donald Trump. This isn't the only reason that Trump came into power, but it's part of the reason. In its self-described PIPER strategy, pick a peck of pickled peppers, the Clinton campaign proposed intentionally cultivating extreme right-wing presidential candidates. Yeah, hoping to turn them into the new mainstream of the Republican Party in order to increase Clinton's chances of winning. The Clinton campaign and Democratic National Committee called for using far-right candidates as a cudgel to move the more established candidates further to the right. Yeah, we talk about that all the time on podcasts by George. Now they're so far right on the political platform, they've jumped off and ran over the horizon. Clinton's camp insisted that Trump and other extremists should be elevated to leaders of the pack, and media outlets should be told to take them seriously. The strategy backfired royally. On April 23rd, 2015, 2 weeks after Hillary Clinton officially declared for presidential campaign, her staff sent out a group message with information for a strategy call. The email included as an attachment a memo for the DNC discussion. Now, this article in Salon includes this memo. I want folks to prepare themselves to look at this, because this is one of the memos that was published by WikiLeaks, the Democratic National Committee, April 7th, 2015. It reads, friends, this memo is intended to outline the strategy and goals a potential Hillary Clinton presidential campaign would have regarding the 2016 Republican presidential field. Highlighted. That's my part here. Clearly, most of what is contained in this memo is the work the DNC is already doing. They were already doing this stuff prior to 2016. The exercise is intended to put those ideas to paper. Our goals and strategy, reading on, our hope is that the goal of a potential HRC campaign in the DNC would be one in the same, to make whoever the Republicans nominate unpalatable to a majority of the Democrats, or to the electorate, I'm sorry. We've outlined 3 strategies to obtain our goal. Force all Republican candidates to lock themselves into extreme conservative positions that will hurt them in a general election. Oh my God, what could go wrong with that idea? Undermine any credibility, trust Republican presidential candidates have to make inroads to our coalition or independence. Muddy the waters on any potential attack lodged against HRC. And it goes on to talk specifically about Pied Piper candidates. There are 2 ways to approach the strategies mentioned above. I know I'm reading a lot. I'm going to let the doc here talk in just a minute. The first is to use the field as a whole to inflict damage on itself, similar to what happened to Mitt Romney in 2012. The variety of candidates is a positive here, and many of the lesser known can serve as a cudgel, that language again, to move the more established candidates further to the right. In this scenario, we don't want to marginalize the more extreme candidates, but make them more Pied Piper candidates who actually represent the mainstream of the Republican Party, which they do now, for God's sake. That's what happened. Pied Piper candidates include, but aren't limited to, this is what they were talking about back then, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and of course, another nut, Ben Carson. We need to be elevating the Pied Piper candidates so that they are leaders of the pack and tell the press to take them seriously. Okay, so let me take that down off screen, because I don't normally read that often, but that's big news, Doc. That, and people, I don't even know if this gets reported, if at all. Oh yeah, by the way, again, that came out of WikiLeaks, and Assange is sitting over there in Belmarsh prison in London for publishing stuff like that. We wouldn't know about this, but we would suspect it. I mean, the doc's seen crap like this for decades, but we wouldn't know. We wouldn't have this memorandum if it wasn't for WikiLeaks. So, Doc, take it from here.
Well, that's right, and everything you said, should be huge news, but instead we are watching horses parading in front of Buckingham Palace, and we're seeing church services of the Queen and stuff beyond, I think, what is of interest to anyone. The importance of the Queen, certainly, interesting person. Thank you very much. But there's other stuff that we ought to talk about and know about. I haven't seen this. I mean, that's the nice thing about Podcast by George is you snap up stuff and you share it with your viewers and listeners and podcast addicts that should be on top of the news on the 3 or 4 cable channels and on public radio and other sources, because, you know, maybe the Democratic National Committee could also create an app to try to improve the Iowa caucuses
Yeah.
and make them work better, because they only worked really great for, 45 years or 44 years.
Let's do
And
that again.
let's step in there and create an app created by Hillary Clinton's former staff people, which has reduced the chances of Iowa getting back the first in the nation caucuses. So the Democratic National Committee for the Democratic Party is, kind of a big risk factor. I'm not sure that they're, understanding the consequences or, essentially what they're doing, because certainly with this, they have created a powerful conservative force in America that was much weaker before all of this, and now it's quite a powerful group, of millions of people. Yeah, what could go wrong, as you said, and it went wrong.
And look what resulted from it. And the thing I can't overstate in the beginning of that Associated Press article, this is Associated Press. Now, this is not left-wing media that we're talking about here.
Right.
They're flatly stating that this is happening in New Hampshire and that it is ongoing around the country.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? We're talking about Democratic money, and they get that money from us to a certain extent. I mean, from donors. Your money, when they call you on the phone and you pledge to go vote blue, no matter who, and all that type of thing, it's going to, what's that guy's name? Balduke. But yeah, in New Hampshire, as an example, the most conservative candidate in the race, because they want him to win the Republican primary nomination so that he can run against their Democratic candidate, and that didn't work with Trump and Hillary as an example. Yeah.
And let me tell you that Baldock was not able to raise hardly any money in New Hampshire or from the National Republican Party. He had a tiny amount of money, and yet the ads that were run by, independent groups with strange names, that, you didn't know exactly who they were. But they were lots of ads. They were very well done. They were very powerful ads against the guy that he was running against, Baldock was running against. And some ads that were run, saying, how, he was this, go-to guy. He hardly had any money, hardly spent any money. There are lots of road, yard signs. They put them by the road and intersections here in New Hampshire. For him, but that was pretty much it. And everybody said, well, he's not getting support from his own party. So the Democrats had to step in and do that for him.
Oh, God.
Yeah, really. Come on.
I mean, you can't make it up, Doc.
Somebody going to get fired, maybe, huh?
Yeah. And not only is it stupid, I don't know. Election law is very nebulous, obviously. I don't know if that's even legal, but the insult to the injury is, my God, that's what gave rise to a certain extent to Donald Trump. It's why we're where we're at with the climate. I mean, Trump had 4 years in the presidency. He didn't address climate at all. He was a climate denier, obviously. He didn't believe in it. And it all goes back to that. And now here we sit on the precipice with these tipping points going by us and the end of humanity as we know it. And who knows when it's actually going to happen. But I think it's going to happen much more sooner than we think. Okay, that's just kind of the closing on that segment. I wanted to get to this next one because this is in Doc's wheelhouse, and this is something that he'll know about because he and I have talked about this before on the show. Folks may have seen that. This is from the morning, the New York Times newsletter that I get. It's authored by this David Leonhardt guy. He says, good morning. Are Democrats again about to be disappointed by overly optimistic polling? And he's talking about 2022 as we look ahead. As you know, Democrats supposedly got a big bounce, ironically, about this Roe v. Wade thing. And it's reflected in polling. But he's saying the final polls in the 2020 presidential election overstated Joe Biden's strength, especially in a handful of states. The polls reported that Biden had a small lead in North Carolina. You've seen Matthew Ho on my show. He's running for Senate in North Carolina. But he lost the state to Donald Trump. Now, the polls also showed Biden running comfortably ahead in Wisconsin, yet he won it by less than a percentage point. In Ohio, the polls pointed to a tight race. Instead, Trump won it easily. So what about these polls? What the hell's up with this? In each of these states and some others, pollsters failed to reach a representative sample of voters. One factor seems to be that Republican voters are more skeptical of mainstream institutions and are less willing to respond to a survey. Now, this gets to what the doc and I have talked about. Doc, you've heard me mention this before. If somebody calls on the phone and a Republican answers, and you say, well, I'm with the New York Times. We're taking a poll on the president. Okay, they're either going to screw with that person or they're not going to participate or whatever. And it depends on where you're calling, obviously. But I think that's what happens with this polling a lot. And my take on it is I don't think we can ever trust polls again because people are of that mind.
Well, that's true. And we know that it's become more difficult to get good random samples or actually proportional samples of the American voting public because, we used to do it by calling people in their homes on their phone right during dinner time. Now people don't have phones at home anymore and they're wandering around the mall or not, maybe not the mall, but the big box store or Home Depot or somewhere with their smartphones. And those are harder to poll. And so they've had to try to move to things like internet polling, which I think, some of the sampling there isn't very good. And let me also add what the consequences are of those polls, which is if people think that Bolduc is really too extreme in New Hampshire, and they keep saying that in the media in New Hampshire, the national media, everybody, it means a lot of Democrats are not going to bother to vote because they're going to go, well, this guy is never going to win. And Maggie Hassan, the current senator who's up for re-election, a Democrat, is going to easily win it because Bolduc is too conservative. If people feel that way because the polls have kind of led them, to sort of be lazy about voting, then he'll win.
My God. Yeah.
It affects voting. Polls affect voting. I've always said I'm not really sure we should allow polling because polling is not a neutral reporting phenomenon. Polling has enormous consequences for actual behavior in society.
I can see that argument.
Gallup called me and said, shit, Schmidt, you shut up. We're going to continue polling. So
yeah, it's a huge industry. Yeah, it's a big business. People don't understand or realize that. But to the doc's point, I think, well, that's crazy. Well, if they're not accurate, what the hell? And they're affecting outcomes in elections the way that he's talking about, they may be doing more harm than good. Okay, we're running. I see we're already over, almost coming up. We got about 15 minutes left with the doc. I wanted to get to this because he mentioned it. And this is this thing, and I got a couple of queries from people that knew that the doc was going to be on today, because if you turn on the television right now, you're going to see the procession. I mean, Queen Elizabeth, they're trying to get her, across the country, get her buried, get her in the ground. It reminds me of when Reagan died, for God's sake. I used to sit there and look at the TV and think, my God, how long is this going to go on? Well, this is from the Chris Hedges report. People know that I'm a huge fan of Chris Hedges. I'm going to read some of this, and then we'll get to the doc. Now, this is very critical, but tell me what is not accurate about this, folks, and we'll have the doc respond to it. Chris Hedges says the fawning adulation of Queen Elizabeth in the United States, which fought a revolution to get rid of the monarchy, and in Great Britain, is in direct proportion to the fear gripping a discredited, incompetent, and corrupt global ruling elite. The global oligarchs are not sure the next generation of royal sock puppets, mediocrities, that include a pedophile prince and his brother, a cranky and eccentric king who accepted suitcases and bags stuffed with $3.2 million in cash from the former prime minister of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabir Al Thani. Maybe, I don't know. He's got to have the longest name of any prime minister. His millions stashed in offshore accounts are up to the job. Let's hope that they are right. He says the cries of the millions of victims of empire, the thousands killed, tortured, raped, and imprisoned during the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya, the 13 Irish civilians gunned down in Bloody Sunday, which the doc remembers well, the more than 4,100 First Nations children who died or went missing in Canada's residential schools, government-sponsored institutions established to assimilate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture, and the hundreds of thousands, some people say a million, killed during the invasion and occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, are drowned out by cheers for royal processions and the sacral aura of obsequious, obsequious press weaves around the aristocracy. Okay, so I'm going to put that down because it just goes on and on. But that kind of gives the general point, obviously, that Chris Hedges is making. This stuff isn't just pomp and circumstance. It isn't just silliness. It isn't just harmless, to his point. This monarchy, I don't know how much good it does, Doc, but his argument would be it does a lot of harm, and this might be the end of it. This generation that's passing may finally be sick and tired of the English monarchy. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because there is a sign that a lot of people in the UK just want to move on to something else. It's a very expensive thing to do. I mean, the uniforms are great, and I love horses. So I'm a big admirer of those great horses. But what you're seeing is in many places around the world, now that the Queen has passed, countries that are part of the British Commonwealth are basically saying, well, that era is now past, and so we're not going to be part of the Commonwealth anymore. We know that Barbados and some other islands in the Caribbean have said that. Canada probably will stick with it, but there is a lot of criticism of the legacy of British rule. The other thing that's not reported, because probably, it's not appropriate to do that at the time, is that UK, Great Britain, Scotland, I'm not that clear about, and certainly not Wales. I can't ever pronounce the names of Welsh cities and driveways. I've been to Wales and gotten lost all over the place because they're as long as that ruler that you just read.
Yeah.
Welsh is a very strange language. They're not doing well. The UK is in a huge financial crisis. They have a political problem that is enormous. They've got another prime minister now who was selected by her buddies and her friends in the party power structure, not by the voters, because they don't hold general elections very often. The economy is hurting people. Their healthcare service has massive delays. So if you get sick in the UK, you're not going to get in to see anybody very quickly. They dropped out of the European Union, which seemed like a good idea at the time. And I'm not sure that everybody agrees that they've gained a lot from that. They have a labor shortage because their population structure doesn't produce a lot of, working age people, a lot of elderly. And so, yes, you can celebrate the Queen, the ceremony of it, the beautiful castles and properties. But underneath it, it's like a house that, has a nice paint job. But once you get inside the walls, there's a lot of rot there. And that, you can cover it up for a while, but it's there for the new prime minister now to go, okay, what am I going to do with all this stuff? The legacy of colonialism is not a good legacy at all. Remember, the British also tried messing with Afghanistan the way the Indian empires did, the way the British did, and the Russians did. We tried to tame Afghanistan, and none of us have succeeded. So there's a lot of history of failure. On the other hand, somebody said to me a couple of days ago, yeah, but remember, if the British hadn't given up Hong Kong, the Chinese probably would have backed off and not gone in there and crushed the independence of Hong Kong because they didn't want to really confront Britain on this. So there was, there were some effects, I guess, and the support that Britain is giving to Ukraine has been substantial, though there are controversies as to whether they should be spending so much money and so much of their military equipment on Ukraine.
Yeah, what could go wrong? Yeah.
I think Tucker Carlson doesn't like that very much. If you
I don't like it either. And the precedent's been set, exactly what you were talking about. Look at all those other failed endeavors and the results of that. Afghanistan, Iraq, all those things leap right off the page at you. And I want to finish this very quickly because as the doc mentioned, a lot of people, this PIED-PIPER strategy, they weren't aware of that. They're not aware of this either. So let me see if I can get this to come up on screen here. And we'll finish this out here. This is from the Chris Hedges reports. Doc, the royals are oligarchs, he says. They are guardians of their class, the world's largest landowners. Now, listen to this list. They include King Mohammed VI of Morocco with 176 million acres. The Holy Roman Catholic Church, you would expect that, they own 177 million acres. The heirs of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia with 531 million acres, and I think some in the United States as well. And now King Charles III with 6.6 billion acres of land. That's a billion with a B, folks. British monarchs are worth almost $28 billion. The British public will provide a $33 million subsidy to the royal family over the next 2 years, although the average household in the UK saw its income fall for the longest period since the records began in 1955, and 227,000 households experienced homelessness in Britain. Okay, so we're running out of time with the doc. I'd like to go into that some more, but I just can't do it. We just don't have the time, Doc. But I mean, it shows you the inequities of the real world versus the, what do you want to call it, fairyland world of the British monarchy.
Yeah, and some of those acres maybe could be converted to affordable housing, right?
Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, now somebody said to me, yeah, but you know what? A lot of that land is preserved. It isn't built. It isn't suburban. And so it's a kind of environmental thing because the new king of the UK is a big environmentalist, supposedly. He's very concerned about species, disappearing and things like that. But yes, the world is a very socially unequal place and has been, I think, for all through history. I don't remember reading much history where, everybody was sort of equal and they all lived happily in nice little houses and had good incomes. So human beings like to accumulate stuff, and the ones with a lot of power accumulate a lot of stuff. So whether that will continue and is sustainable or not, I'm not sure. I've got other things I'd like to know about besides why the flowers on the coffin are a certain type of flower that comes from her castle in Balmoral, Scotland. So it is great pageantry. The medals and the uniforms are fantastic. Some of the royals have been told they're not allowed to wear their military uniforms to her actual funeral service. They're really angry about that. So we should pay a lot of attention to that. That is important news, George.
Yeah.
Very important news. So
that's not facetious. The BBC had a news break and they went live because Prince Charles or Prince or they were standing there looking at the memoriams that people had placed. And they went live to that to show again what you're talking about, the flowers and stuff. It was big national news on the BBC. Honest to God. So, all right, well, we're running out of time. I have half a mind to play this Harry Truman clip again. It's only a minute. Watch this, folks, and then we'll come right back to the doc. And I want to end this way because we talked about climate, we talked about politics, we've talked about all these things. Don't be a dill pickle eater. Don't be Harry R. Truman. Here it is again. Watch this.
Those having homes, lodges, or camps in the area were urged to leave. Using a donated helicopter and a large drop box, the operators of the Spirit Lake Youth Camp began hauling out. Most were taking the warnings seriously. Still others were not impressed with the warnings.
You don't mind working in the shadow of the mountain then?
No, not at all. There's nothing to be scared of. More danger than one of them trees falling on the backside than there is mountain of exploding.
For 83-year-old Harry Truman, operator of St. Helens Lodge on Spirit Lake, the warnings fell on deaf ears. He wasn't moving anywhere.
That's my life. Spirit Lake and Mount St. Helens is my life, folks. I've lived there 50 years. It's a part of me. That mountain and that lake is a part of Truman, and I'm a part of it.
Well, Harry's still there. Actually, he's not. I saw a report where it said he probably was like ionized when that thing blew up. I mean, he's really not below 50 yards of slag. There's 50 yards of slag where he was, but he ain't there. And I mean, that's what we've got to try to keep from doing. These tipping points are being passed. We're going to be underneath the slag if we don't change course, Doc. That's where we started, and I guess that's where we'll finish. Any closing comment here? I'd love to give you the last word.
Well, the lemmings run towards the cliff and everybody follows them. And that's what the Democrats were hoping to do. They were hoping to have Donald Trump appeal to all these lemming voters who would fall off the cliff, and then Hillary Clinton would become president. The same thing they did with candidate Bolduc here in New Hampshire. But, the lemmings didn't fall off the cliff. And with Hillary Clinton, she lost, and who knows what's going to happen here. So that's, I think, the sort of lesson we are looking for, and we'll have to wait until the general election to see what happens.
My God. And you talk about the definition of insanity. Let's quit repeating the errors of the past. And it has been done. And we've been picking on New Hampshire a little bit, but that also was done in Michigan. It's been, as the article states, it's ongoing. It's been done regularly. And I don't think the people that are being contacted for money, myself included, by the Democratic Party, understand that when you give them money, that's what they're doing with it. That's the insult to the injury that I just cannot get over with, Doc.
I don't give money to political parties.
Attaboy.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the way. Doc, as always, pal, thanks for coming on this edition of the podcast by George Liveline. We'll circle back again very quickly because we're hurtling headlong now into the November election for 2022. I mean, it's a lot closer than people think. We talk a lot about, my God, turn on the news tonight and you'll see January 6th in Mar-a-Lago, but this election does have ramifications, and it's coming up very soon. We'll, like I said, we'll come back right after. Well, we'll check in with you before the off-season election. We'll do that. So thanks again, Doc.
Thank you.
All right, so let's take him off screen here and bring me up, and we'll remove the Doc. I got to click a couple of buttons. I always appreciate people playing along with me when it comes to the technology. Folks, if you like seeing, Dr. Steffen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor Emeritus from Iowa State University, no greater authority on politics, both at home and abroad. If you like seeing him on Podcast by George, you can do us a big favor on Facebook, like us, follow us there on YouTube, subscribe, ring the notification bell, give us a big thumbs up, leave a comment if you like. And then, of course, you can also go to podcastbygeorge.com, the website, click on an icon, a badge there, and you'll be subscribed. You'll be able to notified. They'll let you know when a new show drops, and you'll never miss a single live line on Podcast by George. But that is going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.